The Veluxi had lived in peace for 12,000 years. Their cities were made of living crystal that sang when the wind touched them. Their people were gentle creatures with wings like glass and eyes that reflected starlight. They had never built weapons. They had never needed to. The universe, they believed, was a place of wonder and discovery. They were wrong. Ambassador Zinthala stood at the observation window of the collective's central station. He was old, even by Veluxi standards, and he had seen many things in his long life. He had watched young colonies grow into thriving worlds. He had witnessed the birth of new stars. But he had never seen anything like the images now burning on the screens behind him. 3 colony worlds had gone silent in 72 hours. Billions of his people simply gone. The last transmissions showed only darkness and screaming, in shapes that moved wrong in the void. The Kethfer had come. No one knew where they came from. They appeared at the edge of Veluxi space like a disease spreading through healthy flesh. Their ships were not built from metal or crystal. They were grown. Living things twisted into weapons with holes that breathed and engines that pulsed like beating hearts. They did not come to conquer. They did not come to negotiate. They came to feed. Zinthala's wings trembled as he watched another transmission die. The colony on Velith Prime had been home to 4 billion souls. Families, children, artists, and teachers and dreamers. Now there was only static and the distant echo of something vast chewing through orbital stations like a creature eating bones. "Voice Zinthala," said his youngest advisor, her voice barely above a whisper. "Our defense fleet reports contact with the enemy. They are requesting orders." Zinthala closed his eyes. The Veluxi defense fleet was designed to push asteroids away from populated worlds. It was meant to discourage pirates and escort trading vessels. It had never been tested against true warfare because the Veluxi had never faced true warfare. "Tell them to hold position," he said. "By time for evacuations." He knew what he was asking. He was asking them to die. The first battle lasted 11 minutes. Zinthala watched it happen on the tactical display, each friendly symbol winking out like candles in a storm. The Veluxi ships fired their deflection cannons, weapons designed to nudge rocks, and the shots splashed harmlessly against the Kethfer bioarmor. Then the enemy fired back. Ships that had protected the collective for generations became expanding clouds of debris and frozen bodies. "They are gone," his military advisor said, his voice hollow. "All of them." Zinthala turned away from the display. His hearts were beating too fast, and his vision was blurring at the edges. 12,000 years of peace, and it would end like this. Not with a whimper, not with a slow decline, but with monsters appearing from the dark and eating everything his people had ever built. "There is one option remaining," said Scholar Thix, the eldest keeper of records. She was ancient, her wings faded to pale gray, but her mind was still sharp. "The Universal Distress Protocol." The room went silent. The Universal Distress Protocol was a signal designed to reach every spacefaring species within 1,000 light-years. It was a cry for help broadcast on every frequency in every known language. It had been created during the early days of Veluxi expansion, when the universe seemed dangerous and unknown. But it had never been used. The Veluxi had never needed anyone else. "If we send that signal," Zinthala said slowly, "we announce to the entire galaxy that we are weak, that we are dying. Other predators might come. Other predators are already here," Thix replied. "What do we have to lose?" Zinthala looked at the tactical display. The Kethfer fleet was moving toward the inner systems now, toward the homeworld where 20 billion Veluxi lived their quiet, gentle lives. They had perhaps 6 days before the monsters arrived. "Send the signal," he said. The message went out into the dark. It traveled at the speed of light and faster, bouncing through relay stations and quantum networks, spreading across the galaxy like ripples in a pond. It spoke of death and fear and a peaceful people facing extinction. It begged for help from anyone who might listen. For 2 days, there was only silence. Zinthala did not sleep. He could not. He stood at his post and watched the Kethfer advance, world by world, system by system. More colonies went dark. More billions vanished into the hungry mouths of living ships. His people prayed to gods that did not answer, and prepared to die with whatever dignity they could find. Then, on the third day, a response came. The communications officer nearly fell from her station when the signal appeared. She was young, barely past her first molting, and her wings buzzed with nervous energy as she decoded the transmission.
"A voice, Synthala," she said, her voice cracking.
Someone answered. "A ship. No, a fleet. They are coming." Relief flooded through Zinthala's old body. Salvation. Someone had heard their cry and chosen to help. He straightened his wings and composed himself, ready to greet whatever civilized species had decided to extend mercy to the dying. "Put the transmission on screen," he ordered. The message appeared, and Zinthala felt his relief curdle into something else entirely. The text was simple, direct, and strangely brutal in its efficiency. There were no flowery diplomatic phrases, no expressions of sympathy, just cold, hard facts. Deathworlder, fleet responding. Classification, human, Armada designation. The seventh hammer, ETA. 6 standard cycles. Hold the line. Deathworlders, Zinthala whispered. He turned to Scholar Thix, confusion evident in every line of his aged face. That term refers to species from Class 12 hostile worlds. Such species are theoretical. The conditions required for their evolution would kill any developing civilization. Thix's wings had gone still, which was never a good sign. She moved to her console and began pulling up files from the collective xenobiology archives. Her movements became slower and slower as she read, and when she finally turned back to face the ambassador, her compound eyes were wide with something that looked very much like fear. "The humans are not theoretical," she said. "They're real." And voice Zinthala, "You need to see this." The file appeared on the main screen. Planet designation, Earth. Classification, Class 12 Death World. And then came the details. Gravity, crushing more than twice what Veluxi could survive. Atmosphere, corrosive oxygen mixed with toxic nitrogen. Temperature variations, extreme, ranging from frozen wastelands to boiling deserts. Surface coverage, 70% liquid water, filled with billions of microscopic organisms that could kill through infection alone, and the life forms. Predators on every landmass. Venomous creatures in every ocean. Plants that produced poison, insects that hunted in swarms, and natural disasters that could flatten cities. Earthquakes, hurricanes, volcanic eruptions. The planet itself seemed designed to kill anything foolish enough to exist on its surface. "The humans evolved there," Thix said quietly. "They did not merely survive. They conquered. They spread across every environment their world offered, no matter how hostile. They domesticated predators. They altered their own food sources. They bent their entire planet to their will through sheer, stubborn refusal to die." Zinthala stared at the screen. In the distance, the Kethvar fleet continued its advance. "Those terrible living ships growing closer with every passing hour. What have we invited into our home?" he asked. No one answered. No one could. And in the darkness between stars, the seventh hammer came. Admiral Alina Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UES Prometheus and watched the stars stretch into lines as her fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Around her, 200 warships emerged from the void in perfect formation. Cruisers and destroyers took their positions with practiced ease. Carrier-class vessels released swarms of fighter craft for patrol duty, and at the center of it all, the 3 siege breakers hung like sleeping giants, their massive frames bristling with weapons that had ended wars before they began. The seventh hammer had arrived. Vasquez was a small woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and eyes that had seen too much death. She had fought in the colony wars. She had stood against the rogue AI collective when machines tried to consume human space. She had buried friends and sent thousands of soldiers to their deaths, always in service of something greater than herself. Now she was here, at the edge of unknown space, answering a distress call from a species humanity had never met. "Admiral," said Commander Torres, her second in command, We are receiving a transmission from the Veluxy station. They are requesting immediate contact. Vasquez nodded. Put them through. And Torres, remind our people about first contact protocols. These aliens have never seen humans before. Let us try not to terrify them too badly. The transmission connected, and Vasquez got her first look at the Veluxy. They were beautiful, in a strange and fragile way. Insectoid bodies covered in iridescent scales. Wings like stained glass that caught the light. Large compound eyes that reflected everything around them. They looked like creatures from a fairy tale. Delicate and precious. They also looked absolutely terrified. The Veluxy ambassador. An elderly creature who introduced himself as Zinthala. Could barely keep his voice steady as he spoke. His wings trembled constantly. His advisors kept backing away from the screen whenever a human moved too quickly. Admiral Vasquez, Zinthala said, "We are grateful beyond words for your response to our distress call. The Kethfer have destroyed our outer colonies and are advancing toward our homeworld. We have perhaps 4 days before they arrive. Whatever assistance you can provide would be most welcome." Vasquez studied the tactical data the Veluxy were transmitting. The Kethfer fleet was massive, thousands of bioships spreading across multiple systems. Their advance was systematic and brutal. They left nothing behind but dead worlds and empty space. "Ambassador," she said, "I need to understand what we are dealing with. Tell me everything you know about these Kethfer." What followed was a briefing that made even Vasquez's hardened officers uncomfortable. The Kethfer were not merely conquerors. They were consumers. Their ships were living organisms that required organic matter for fuel and reproduction. They did not take prisoners. They did not negotiate. They harvested entire civilizations, processing billions of sentient beings into raw materials for their endless expansion. They had done this too. Over 100 species across thousands of years, the Veluxy were simply the latest course in an endless meal. "These creatures," Vasquez said slowly, "they are Deathworlders, are they not?" "Like us." Zinthala's wings went still. "Yes, Admiral. They evolved on a high-gravity moon with a methane atmosphere. They are apex predators of the highest classification. Our scholars believe that encountering one Deathworlder species in our existence would be statistically unlikely. Now we face 2. There was fear in his voice when he said that last part. Fear not just of the Kethfer, but of the humans who had come to save them. Vasquez understood. To a species that had never known violence, both looked like monsters. "Ambassador, I would like to send a delegation to your station. My officers need to coordinate directly with your people. We have much to discuss." The meeting took place in the Veluxy Command Center, a beautiful space filled with crystalline structures and soft harmonics. The human delegation arrived in full dress uniform. Moving with the careful precision they had been trained to use around more fragile species, it did not help. The Veluxia reacted to human presence like prey animals sensing wolves. When Lieutenant Chen smiled in greeting, showing his teeth, several Veluxy officials actually fled the room. When Commander Torres caught a falling datapad with reflexes honed by years of combat training, the nearest alien fainted. "You are persistence predators," Zinthala said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your ancestors hunted by following prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. You simply refused to stop." Torres nodded. "That is correct. Our endurance was our greatest weapon. Your bodies heal from wounds that would kill any other species. You consume the flesh of other animals for sustenance. You require only a few hours of unconsciousness each day to function. You can survive temperature extremes that would destroy our technology." Zinthala paused. "And you came here, to the edge of unknown space, to fight an enemy you have never seen, for a species you have never met." "Why?" It was Admiral Vasquez who answered. She had been standing quietly near the tactical displays, studying the Kethfer advance patterns. "Because we remember what it was like to be alone," she said. "Humanity spent thousands of years looking at the stars and wondering if anyone else was out there. When we finally reached space, we found a galaxy full of life, but also full of danger. We learned that the universe does not care about the weak or the gentle. It will crush them without mercy." She turned to face Cynthia. But we also learned that strength means nothing if you only use it for yourself. Your people sent a call for help. We will always answer. The planning sessions that followed were intense. Human tactical officers worked alongside Veluxy scholars, combining humanity's experience with warfare with the Veluxy's detailed knowledge of local space. The plan took shape over hours of careful discussion. The Kethver would not expect significant resistance. They had never faced it before. That arrogance could be exploited. We will meet them at the debris field around your third moon, Vasquez explained, pointing to the tactical display. The terrain favors ambush tactics. Our ships are built for close-quarters combat. If we can draw them into the field and fragment their formation, we can fight them on our terms. And if they do not take the bait? Cynthia asked. Vasquez's smile did not reach her eyes. Then we will make them take it. The first phase of the plan was simple. Psychological warfare. Humanity had learned long ago that the mind could be as powerful a weapon as any bomb or bullet. Fear could break armies before a single shot was fired. A single human destroyer. The UES Harbinger jumped into the path of the advancing Kethver fleet. It did not attack. It did not retreat. It simply broadcast a message on all frequencies and waited. The message was footage from human history. Wars and conflicts spanning thousands of years. Soldiers charging across muddy fields. Cities burning under atomic fire. Humans fighting and dying and rising again over and over, refusing to be destroyed no matter how terrible the cost. And at the end, Admiral Vasquez appeared on screen. You have harvested the weak for long enough, she said. You believe yourselves apex predators? You believe nothing can stop you. But you have never faced Earth. You have never faced humanity. We are coming for you. And we do not stop. We never stop. The transmission ended in the command chamber of the Kethver flagship. The Hive Admiral processed this new information. It was an ancient creature, vast and cold, and utterly without mercy. It had consumed civilizations beyond counting. It had faced every weapon the galaxy could produce. But as it watched the human footage, as it saw the species that had turned their own world into a graveyard and somehow survived, something stirred in its ancient mind, something it had not felt in 10,000 years. Fear. The Kethver did not retreat. They could not. Their species required constant expansion, constant consumption. To stop was to die. And so the Hive Admiral pushed aside its momentary doubt and ordered the full armada to advance. 12,000 bioships moved through the darkness of space. They were terrible things, grown from the harvested flesh of 100 civilizations. Their hulls pulsed with stolen life. Their weapons dripped with organic acid. They moved like a swarm of locusts descending on a field of grain, and they expected to find nothing but easy prey. Admiral Vasquez watched them come and felt something close to satisfaction. All ships to battle stations, she ordered. Execute Operation Broken Fang. The debris field around Veluxy's third moon was a graveyard of rock and ice. The remains of an ancient collision that had shattered the satellite millions of years ago. It stretched across thousands of kilometers, a maze of tumbling asteroids and frozen chunks of debris. The Kethver saw it as cover, a place to hide their approach. They did not understand that humans had invented ambush warfare before they had invented writing. The first wave of bioships entered the debris field with confidence. They were the hunters. They were always the hunters. Nothing in the galaxy had ever made them prey. Then the mines began to detonate, hidden among the asteroids. Disguised as ordinary rocks, thousands of human weapons came to life. Electromagnetic pulses ripped through Kethver navigation systems, blinding the living ships. Kinetic charges slammed into organic holes at velocities that turned metal into plasma. The darkness of space lit up with explosions, and the screams of dying bioships echoed across every frequency. First wave neutralized, reported the tactical officer. Enemy losses at approximately 400 vessels. Vasquez nodded but did not celebrate. 400 ships was nothing to an armada of 12,000. This was just the beginning. The Kethver adapted quickly. Their bioships were designed for evolution, capable of changing their own structure in response to new threats. Within hours, they had developed countermeasures against the mines. Their organic armor thickened. Their sensors expanded. They began to sweep the debris field systematically. Hunting for the hidden human fleet, they found them at the shattered core of the old moon, where the largest chunks of debris provided cover for the waiting warships. "Contact," said Commander Torres. "They have found us." "Good," Vasquez replied. "All ships, weapons free." The Battle of Broken Moons began in earnest. Human cruisers opened fire with railgun batteries, accelerating metal slugs to speeds that could punch through anything. Destroyers unleashed plasma lances that burned through organic tissue like fire through paper. Fightercraft swarmed between the asteroids, engaging Kethfer interceptors in dogfights that moved too fast for most species to follow. The Kethfer fired back with weapons grown from nightmares. Acidic projectiles that dissolved metal on contact, living missiles that sought heat and motion, tendrils of organic matter that tried to latch onto human ships and drag them into waiting mouths. Ships died on both sides. Human and Kethfer vessels tore each other apart in the spinning darkness, their wreckage adding to the debris field that had become their battleground. But there was a difference. The Kethfer fought to consume. The humans fought to protect. When a Kethfer bioship latched onto the destroyer, U.S. Thunderchild, the crew did not abandon ship. They sealed themselves in the engineering section and detonated the reactor core, taking the enemy vessel with them. When the cruiser Indomitable lost all propulsion, her captain ordered ramming speed and drove his dying ship into a Kethfer carrier, destroying both in a flash of nuclear fire. The humans sang as they died. Old songs from Earth, hymns of defiance and courage passed down through generations. Their voices carried across the communication channels, and even the Veluxi, watching from distant stations, felt something stir in their hearts. "Why do they do this?" Ambassador Zinthala asked. He was watching the battle from the command center, unable to look away. "Why do they sacrifice themselves so willingly?" "We are strangers to them," Commander Torres, who had remained behind to coordinate with the Veluxi, turned to face him. His uniform was stained with sweat, and his eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but his voice was steady. "Because we remember being alone," he said. "For thousands of years, humanity looked at the stars and saw only emptiness. We faced extinction a dozen times, plagues, wars, climate disasters. Each time, we survived by helping each other, by refusing to abandon our own." He paused. "When we finally reached the stars and found other species, we swore an oath. No one would face the darkness alone. Not ever again. You called for help. We answered. That is what we do." Zinthala did not know what to say. His people had spent 12,000 years in peace, never understanding the concept of sacrifice for strangers. But as he watched human ships burn to protect his homeworld, he began to understand something about the universe he had never grasped before. Strength was not just about power. It was about what you chose to do with that power. The battle raged for 18 hours. The human fleet, outnumbered 60-1, held the line against everything the Kethfer could throw at them. For every human ship that fell, they took 10 enemy vessels with them. The debris field became a graveyard of burning wreckage. The Kethfer advance ground to a halt, but the Hive Admiral had not survived 10,000 years by being foolish. It recognized that the human fleet could not be broken through direct assault. They were too skilled, too determined, too willing to die. A different approach was needed. From the rear of the Kethfer Armada, something massive began to move. "Admiral," said the sensor officer, her voice suddenly tight with fear. "New contact emerging from the enemy formation. It is. Admiral, it is the size of a small moon." Vasquez looked at the tactical display and felt her blood run cold. The Kethfer had deployed their ultimate weapon. A bioship so large, it had its own gravity well. A living moon grown from the corpses of entire civilizations, carrying enough firepower to render planets uninhabitable. It had never been stopped. It had never even been challenged, and it was heading directly for the Veluxi homeworld. "Can we intercept?" Vasquez asked. "Not with our current forces," Torres replied from the Veluxi station. "The enemy fleet is between us and that thing. If we try to pursue, they will cut us apart from behind. Vasquez stared at the display. The living moon was accelerating, bypassing the battle entirely. It would reach the Veluxy homeworld in 6 hours. 20 billion innocent lives hung in the balance. She made her decision. All siege breakers, break formation and pursue the biomoon. Activate Protocol Omega. Silence fell across the bridge. Protocol Omega was the last resort, the final option when all other choices had failed. It required the complete sacrifice of the ships involved. Trading lives for destruction on a massive scale, Admiral, said her weapons officer quietly. Those are 3,000 crew members, I know. Vasquez's voice did not waver, and every one of them volunteered for this duty. They knew what it might cost. Contact the Siegebreaker commanders. Give them the option to decline. The responses came back within seconds. All 3 ships accepted the mission. The Siegebreaker's defiance, sacrifice, and humanity's promise broke away from the main fleet and accelerated toward the living moon. They were the largest vessels humanity had ever built, designed specifically for situations where overwhelming force was the only answer. As they passed the Prometheus, each ship broadcast a final message. "Those who cannot fight," said Captain Okonkwo of the Defiance. "For those who should not suffer," said Captain Chun of the Sacrifice. "You hold the line," said Captain Rodriguez of Humanity's Promise. And then they were gone, racing toward the monster that threatened to devour a world. Vasquez watched them go and allowed herself one moment of grief. Then she turned back to the battle still raging around her. All remaining ships, she ordered, continue engaging the enemy. Make them pay for every centimeter of space they take. Our people need time, the fleet responded. And in the darkness between the stars, 3 ships of heroes flew toward their destiny. Captain James Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched the living moon grow larger on his view screen. He was a tall man with kind eyes and steady hands, a veteran of a dozen campaigns who had never lost a ship under his command. He knew that record was about to end, but he felt no fear. Only purpose. The biomoon was a horror beyond description. It stretched across space like a tumor made of stolen flesh, surface writhing with structures that might have been cities or organs or both. Captured ships jutted from its mass like bones poking through rotting skin. And somewhere deep inside, the neural network that controlled this nightmare pulsed with ancient hunger. "All hands, this is the captain," Okonkwo said over the ship-wide channel. "You know why we are here? You know what we have to do? I will not pretend this will be easy. I will not promise that we will all survive. But I will tell you this. 20 billion innocent lives depend on us today. Beings who have never known war, who have never raised a weapon in anger, who only want to live in peace. The Kethfer want to harvest them like crops. We are going to stop that from happening." He paused, looking around his bridge at the crew who had followed him across the stars. "It has been my honor to serve with you. Whatever happens next, remember that we are the shield that guards the weak. We are the fire that protects, and we do not stop." The crew responded with a single word, shouted in unison: "Never." The 3 siegebreakers reached weapons range of the biomoon and opened fire. Plasma lances carved burning trenches across the living surface. Railgun batteries punched deep into organic tissue, sending fountains of ichor spraying into space. Nuclear-tipped torpedoes detonated in clusters, vaporizing chunks of flesh the size of small cities. The biomoon screamed on every frequency, a sound of pain and rage that made even hardened soldiers flinch. But it did not stop. It could not stop. The Kethfer had built this weapon to be unstoppable, and it simply absorbed the damage and kept coming. "The surface attacks are not working," reported the tactical officer. "The regeneration rate is too high. We need to get inside." Okonkwo nodded. He had expected this. "Launch the boarding pods. All marine companies, prepare for internal assault." Across all 3 siegebreakers, thousands of human soldiers climbed into armored pods and launched themselves at the biomoon. They punched through the writhing surface and crashed into the nightmarish interior. Emerging into corridors of living tissue that pulsed with stolen life, the fighting was immediate and brutal. HFY warriors met the human marines with claws and acid, and weapons grown from bone. They were evolved killers, designed to hunt Deathworlders, and they expected easy victories against the soft creatures invading their home. They were wrong. The humans fought with weapons and fists and teeth when necessary. They advanced through corridors slick with blood, never stopping, never retreating. When soldiers fell, their comrades stepped over the bodies and kept pushing forward. This was what humanity did. This was what they had always done. Okonkwo led the assault personally. He had never asked his people to face danger he would not share, and he was not about to start now. With a plasma rifle in his hands and a squad of veterans at his back, he pushed deeper into the biomoon, heading for the neural clusters that controlled the massive weapon. "Captain," said his communications officer over the radio, "we have located the primary neural hub. It is 3 kilometers ahead through the central processing cavity. Then that is where we go. All teams converge on my position." The advance was measured in blood. Human soldiers fell by the dozens, cut down by HFY defenders or dissolved by acidic secretions from the living walls. But for every human that died, 3 enemy warriors fell. And the Marines kept pushing forward with the terrible persistence that had made their species masters of a death world. They reached the central processing cavity after 2 hours of continuous combat. It was a vast space, larger than most cities, filled with pulsing organs and neural pathways that crackled with bioelectric energy. And there, at the center, was the brain of the biomoon, a massive thinking tissue the size of a stadium connected to every system in the living weapon. "Set the charges," Okonkwo ordered. "Fusion warheads at all primary connection points. We bring this thing down from the inside." The demolition teams moved to their positions. Human soldiers formed a perimeter, holding back waves of HFY reinforcements while the charges were placed. The biomoon knew what was happening. It threw everything it had at the invaders, desperate to stop them. It was not enough. "Charges set," reported the demolition chief. 40 minutes until detonation.
Okonkwo nodded.
"All teams, begin extraction. Get to the surface and signal for pickup." The retreat was even bloodier than the advance. HFY warriors flooded the corridors, trying to stop the humans from escaping. Marines fell by the score, sacrificing themselves to buy time for their comrades. The living walls themselves seemed to close in, trying to crush the invaders before they could flee. And then, as Okonkwo led his remaining soldiers toward the extraction point, something unexpected happened. "Captain," said Sergeant Chen, pointing at a side passage. "There is movement in there, but it does not look like HFY." Okonkwo moved to investigate, and what he found stopped him cold. They were Veluxi. Thousands of them, packed into cramped organic chambers, their bodies connected to the biomoon by tubes and wires. They were alive, barely, their eyes dull and their wings limp.
"Prisoners, living batteries."
Powering the weapon's psychic navigation systems with their own life force. Survivors from the fallen colonies. "God in heaven," whispered one of the Marines. "They are still alive." Okonkwo checked his chronometer. 32 minutes until detonation. There was no time for this. The mission was to destroy the biomoon, not rescue prisoners. Every second they delayed increased the chance of failure. He looked at the Veluxi. Innocent beings, gentle creatures who had never hurt anyone, reduced to living fuel for a weapon of mass destruction. If he left them here, they would die in nuclear fire. Quick, painless, but still death. "Captain," said his lieutenant quietly, "we cannot save them and complete the mission. There is no time." Okonkwo was silent for a long moment. Then he opened his communication channel. "Prometheus, this is Defiance Actual. We have located civilian survivors inside the biomoon. Requesting emergency extraction." Admiral Vasquez's voice came back immediately, tight with stress. "James, we are still engaged with 6,000 enemy vessels. I cannot spare ships for extraction." "Alina," his voice was soft, "we did not come here to let innocents die in fire. Send what you can. We will keep them safe." A pause. then understood. Shuttles are en route. Hold your position. Okonkwo turned to his Marines. Change of plans. We are getting these people out. Form a defensive perimeter and start disconnecting the prisoners. Carefully. The next 30 minutes were the longest of Okonkwo's life. Human soldiers worked frantically to free the Veluxi captives while their comrades held back endless waves of Kethfer attackers. The Biomoon threw everything it had at them, desperate to protect its power source. Shuttles arrived under heavy fire. Pilots performing maneuvers that should have been impossible. They loaded unconscious Veluxi as fast as they could, racing against the countdown that ticked inexorably toward 0. With 3 minutes remaining, the last shuttle launched. Okonkwo was on it, cradling a young Veluxi child who had stopped breathing twice during the evacuation. All hands clear, he reported. Charges are active. Behind them, the fusion warheads detonated. The Biomoon died screaming, its neural network torn apart from within. The explosion lit up the darkness of space like a new sun being born. And 20 billion Veluxi on the homeworld below looked up and saw their salvation written in fire. But on the bridge of the Kethfer flagship, the Hive Admiral watched the destruction of its greatest weapon with cold calculation. The humans had won this battle. They had proven themselves worthy enemies, but they had also revealed their weakness. They would die for strangers. They would sacrifice everything to protect the helpless. That compassion could be exploited. That mercy could be turned against them. The Hive Admiral began issuing new orders. The remaining Kethfer forces would bypass the human fleet entirely. They would strike directly at the Veluxi homeworld, forcing the humans to spread thin, and then, when they were weak and scattered, the Kethfer would devour them all. The Veluxi homeworld burned. Kethfer. Landing forces had broken through the planetary shields and scattered across the surface like a plague. Cities that had stood for thousands of years crumbled under organic bombardment. Billions of civilians fled toward evacuation points that might never activate. The crystal spires that had sung in the wind now screamed as they shattered. Admiral Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Prometheus and watched her tactical display fill with red. Her fleet was scattered across 3 systems, ships damaged and crews exhausted. Ammunition was running low. Reinforcements were impossible. The Kethfer had played their final card, and it was working. They were going to lose. Admiral said Commander Torres, his voice hollow. Veluxi Central Command reports enemy forces approaching the capital. They have perhaps 2 hours before the city falls. Vasquez closed her eyes. She had given everything. Her fleet had given everything. And it was not enough. Then the sensors began to light up. It started as a single contact, appearing at the edge of the system. Then another. Then a dozen. Then 100. Ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel in waves, filling the space around the Veluxi homeworld with vessels of every shape and configuration. "Admiral," said the sensor officer, her voice cracking with disbelief. "We are receiving identification signals. It is the Rillian Concordat, the Vexian broods, the Mendari ascendancy. There are at least 15 different species represented." Vasquez stared at the display. "That is impossible. Those species have hidden from the Kethfer for centuries. They do not fight." A communication channel opened, and a face appeared on screen. It was Rillian, elegant and cold, with features that suggested ancient nobility. But there was something new in those eyes. Something that looked like determination. "Admiral Vasquez," the Rillian said. "I am Fleet Commander Silthan of the Rillian Concordat. We received the Veluxi distress signal many days ago. We chose not to respond. We were afraid." The commander paused. "Then we watched your fleet fight. We watched your people die for strangers. We watched humans sacrifice everything they had for a species they had never met." The Rillian's voice hardened. "We have been cowards for too long. If Deathworlders from a poisoned planet can find the courage to stand against the darkness, then so can we. We are here to fight. Tell us where you need us." More channels opened. More species joined the conversation. The Vexian broods, hive minds, who had hidden in asteroid fields for generations. The Mendari Ascendancy, energy beings who had believed themselves above physical conflict, the Hollow Kings of Arcturus, the Silicon Collective, the Children of the Burning Nebula. One by one, they reported for duty. Not because they were brave, but because humanity had shown them what bravery looked like. Vasquez felt something crack in her chest, something that might have been hope. "All ships," she said, her voice steady despite the tears forming in her eyes. "This is Admiral Vasquez. We are no longer alone. Coordinate with our new allies and prepare for counterattack. We end this today." The combined fleet moved toward the Veluxi homeworld like a wave of righteous fury. Human ships led the charge, their crews fighting with renewed strength now that hope had returned. Rillian vessels swept the flanks with elegant precision. Dexion's swarms overwhelmed Kethfer fighters with sheer numbers. Mendari energy projectors burned through bioarmor that had resisted every other weapon, for the first time in 10,000 years. The Kethfer faced a galaxy united against them. The Hive Admiral could not understand what was happening. Its species had survived by exploiting isolation, by ensuring that prey species never worked together. Cooperation was weakness. Unity was vulnerability. These were the truths that had guided the Kethver since before memory, but the humans had broken those truths. They had shown the galaxy that cooperation was strength, that unity was power, that standing together against the darkness was the only way to survive. All remaining forces, the Hive Admiral ordered, converge on the human flagship. Destroy their leader, and the coalition will fall apart. 6,000 Kethver ships turned toward the Prometheus. It was a desperate gamble, but the Hive Admiral had no other choice. The humans were the heart of this resistance. Cut out the heart, and the body would die. Admiral Vasquez watched the enemy fleet approaching and smiled. "They are coming for us," said Torres. "Of course they are," Vasquez replied. "We are the symbol. Destroy us, and they think they destroy hope." She opened a fleet-wide channel. "All human vessels form up on the Prometheus. We take their charge head-on. Show them what Earth produces." The human fleet gathered around its flagship, a wall of metal and fire standing between the Kethver and victory. Behind them, Allied ships continued the assault on the planetary occupation forces. Millions of Veluxi were being evacuated, carried to safety by vessels from a dozen different species. The final battle was not a slaughter. It was a reckoning. Human ships tore into the Kethver formation with savage precision. Railguns and plasma lances and nuclear warheads turned the darkness into a storm of destruction. Bioships died by the hundreds, their screams echoing across every frequency. But the Kethver pushed forward. They had numbers. They had desperation. And they had the cold certainty that if they failed here, their species would face extinction. The fighting reached the Hive Admiral's flagship. Human Marines breached from one side, Rillian warriors from another. They fought through corridors of living tissue, killing everything in their path, till they reached the command chamber where the ancient creature waited. Admiral Vasquez was among them. She had insisted on leading the assault personally. This was her fight, and she would see it through to the end. The Hive Admiral was massive, a nightmare of chitin and muscle that filled half the chamber. Its eyes were ancient and cold, and when it spoke, its voice resonated with the weight of 10,000 years. "Why?" it asked. "You are Deathworlders. You should be like us. You should consume. You should dominate. Why do you protect the weak?" Vasquez looked at the creature. She saw the hunger that drove it, the emptiness that could never be filled. She understood it, in a way. Humanity had faced that same darkness in its own soul. "We were like you once," she said quietly. "We consumed our own world. We killed our own kind. We nearly destroyed ourselves 100 times over." She raised her weapon. "But we learned. We chose to be better. That is the difference between us." She fired. The Hive Admiral fell, and with it fell the Kethver will to fight. The ancient creature had been more than a leader. It had been the binding force that held the species together. Without it, the remaining bioships scattered in confusion. The battle was over. The Kethver were defeated. In the days that followed, The surviving Kethfer were given a choice: change or die. Some chose extinction, unable to imagine existence without consumption. But others, slowly, began to adapt. They had seen something in the humans, in the coalition of species that had stood against them. Something that suggested a different way of living. It would take generations. It would be painful and difficult and uncertain. But for the first time in their history, the Kethfer had the chance to become something more than predators. On the Veluxi homeworld, a memorial rose from the ashes of the war. It was a towering structure of crystal and light, built from the combined artistry of every species that had fought in the conflict. At its center stood a human figure, arms outstretched. Protecting those behind it, Ambassador Zinthela spoke at the dedication ceremony. His voice trembled with emotion, but his words carried across the gathered crowd. We sent a signal into the darkness, hoping for salvation. Instead, we found something greater. We found family. The humans taught us that strength is not about dominion. It is about service. It is about standing between the helpless and the void and refusing to move. He paused. Looking at the human delegation standing among the crowd, they came from a world that should have killed them 1,000 times over. They survived through stubbornness and courage and an absolute refusal to give up. And when they reached the stars, they did not become conquerors. They became protectors. They became the shield that guards the weak. They became the fire that lights the darkness. Admiral Vasquez stood in the crowd, surrounded by her surviving crew. She said nothing. She did not need to. Across the galaxy, species that had once lived in fear began to build something new. An alliance based not on conquest or trade, but on a simple promise: no one would face the darkness alone. Humanity stood at the center of this coalition, not as rulers, but as examples. The age of predators was ending. The age of guardians was beginning. And deep in the void between stars, a new distress signal activated. Some unknown species, facing some unknown threat, crying out for help in the endless night, across a dozen systems, began to move. Humanity's Deathworlder Armada answered. They always would.